There's a version of Severus Snape that every student at Hogwarts believes they understand. The Gryffindors understand him as the enemy, the professor who has spent 20 years making their house's life systematically difficult, who deducts points with the particular satisfaction of someone settling a debt that predates anyone currently in the building, who looks at Harry Potter with an expression that the entire school reads as hatred, and that is, in fact, something considerably more complicated and considerably more painful than hatred. The Gryffindors understand Snape as the obstacle, as the darkness on the other side of the corridor from everything their house represents. They are wrong about this in ways that will only become clear when it is too late to tell him so. The Slytherins understand him as the protector, the head of house who has spent 2 decades shielding them from the worst of what their affiliation cost them, who navigates the political complexity of running a house whose reputation makes every student in it a suspect, who shows up in the headmaster's office and the staff room and the ministry corridors fighting battles that his students will never see and never know to thank him for. The Slytherins understand Snape as theirs. They are also wrong in a different way, and the wrongness will cost them something too. The Hufflepuffs understand him as the unfair one, the professor whose grading of their work carries a quality of indifference that is almost more demoralizing than active hostility, who doesn't hate them the way he hates Gryffindor, but whose attention moves through them like light through glass, leaving nothing warmed. The Hufflepuffs understand Snape as someone who doesn't fully see them. This one, unlike the others, is mostly accurate. It is also, paradoxically, the most merciful version of his attention available. The Ravenclaws understand him as the intellectual, the only professor in the building whose knowledge of his subject extends genuinely beyond the curriculum, whose potions theory is original rather than inherited, whose annotations in the textbooks they have heard about but never seen represent a quality of magical thinking that the academic part of them recognizes and respects even through the discomfort of his teaching style. The Ravenclaws understand Snape as complicated, which is the closest any house gets to accurate without being accurate. Every one of these understandings is real. Every one of them is a piece of a picture that none of the 4 houses ever assembles completely, because assembling it would require information that Snape has spent his entire adult life ensuring no one possesses simultaneously. The Death Eater past, the Order membership, the Dumbledore arrangement, the Lily Potter problem, which is not a problem in the way problems usually are, not something that can be solved or resolved or moved past, but a permanent organizing fact of his interior life that has been shaping every decision he has made since he was 15 years old, and that the entire school is living inside without knowing it. He was a student here first. This is the fact that the students never fully reckon with, that the man at the front of the dungeon classroom walked these same corridors as a child, was sorted into the same house whose students he now protects, was humiliated by the same house whose students he now punishes through their children, fell in love in these halls with the woman whose son he simultaneously resents and would die for, and has been, across 20 years of teaching, slowly dying for in the way that slow deaths happen, through accumulated cost rather than single moment, through the daily price of maintaining a performance that the performance's purpose requires to be flawless. He is not a good teacher. This needs to be said clearly, in a story that will eventually ask you to understand him. He is brilliant and he is cruel, and these two things coexist in the classroom, without the brilliance redeeming the cruelty, or the cruelty invalidating the brilliance. Students leave his classroom knowing more about potions than they would have learned from a kinderteacher and carrying something else alongside the knowledge, a specific quality of diminishment, the residue of being made to feel insufficient in a subject they worked hard at, that they will not always be able to separate from the knowledge itself. But this story is not only about the classroom. It is about what it is like to live inside a school that this man watches, to be seen by him or not seen, which is its own experience across 7 years, across the phases of his life that coincide with your education, across the versions of Severus Snape that each era of Hogwarts produces. Because he changes. The man who stands at the front of the dungeon in 1991 is not identical to the man who stands there in 1995, and neither of them is the man who sits in the headmaster's chair in 1997, and none of these versions is the man who dies in the shrieking shack in 1998, alone in pain, giving the last thing he has to the boy he resented and protected in equal measure for 17 years. 8 parts, 4 houses, 2 eras of each. The same man, seen from every angle that Hogwarts provides. None of the angles complete. All of them true. Part 1 Gryffindor. The early years, 1981 to 1995. You are in his classroom for the first time, and he already dislikes you. Not you specifically, though it will feel specific. And the feeling will be accurate in ways that are also unfair, which is the particular combination that Snape specializes in. He dislikes you because you are Gryffindor, and you are Gryffindor in his classroom. And his classroom is the one place in the school where the traditional power dynamics of house rivalry reverse completely. In the corridors, in the common rooms, in the social geography of Hogwarts that Gryffindor largely dominates through the combination of its cultural narrative weight and its current golden generation, Snape's house is on the defensive. In the dungeon, he is not. He takes points before the lesson starts. Not from you, from someone near you, for something that wouldn't register as an infraction in any other classroom. You watch this and you learn the first lesson of Snape's Gryffindor years. The rules in this room are calibrated differently, and the calibration is not an accident, and protesting it is itself an infraction. You file this. You survive the first lesson. You exit the dungeon with your cauldron intact, and your dignity approximately 60% intact, and the particular residue of someone who has just spent an hour being watched for failure by someone who would find the failure satisfying. This happens every week for 7 years. What changes across those 7 years is your relationship to it, the process by which an experience that initially produces active distress becomes, through repetition and adaptation, something you navigate rather than endure. By 3rd year, you have a system. You prepare more than the lesson requires. You answer questions with the specific brevity that Snape's classroom seems to reward, not enthusiasm, which he treats with a contempt reserved for what he considers performance, but competence. Quiet, demonstrated, unnecessary commentary-free competence. This works. Not to earn warmth. Warmth is not available in this classroom for Gryffindors, and you have stopped expecting it. But to achieve a kind of professional neutrality, a working relationship with a dungeon that asks little and delivers the knowledge reliably. You learn potions. This seems like a minor point, and is actually significant. Snape is a brilliant teacher in the technical sense, the sense that the material is transmitted with a precision and depth that the curriculum doesn't require. And you emerge from 7 years of hating his classroom able to do things with potions that students from other schools cannot do. The knowledge and the experience of acquiring it are 2 separate things. The knowledge is genuinely his gift. The experience is genuinely his cruelty. Both are real. Holding both simultaneously without letting one cancel the other is, as it turns out, preparation for something, though you won't know what until much later. Harry Potter makes your Snape experience more complicated than it already is. Because whatever Snape carries for your house in general, what he carries specifically for James Potter's son is different, more intense, more personal, more visibly corrosive in the classroom in a way that the rest of you are caught inside without having caused it. You watch Snape watch Harry with the specific attention of someone conducting a private argument, and you watch Harry watch Snape with the specific attention of someone who knows he's losing a war he doesn't understand. And the classroom holds both of them, and the rest of you navigate around the edges of something that is very clearly not about potions. You don't know what it's about. Nobody in Gryffindor does during these years. The answer is in a memory that won't be shown to anyone for a very long time. Part 2 Slytherin. The early years, 1981 to 1995. He is yours, and you know it, and it changes everything. Not in the way that favoritism usually operates, not the obvious, embarrassing, points awarded for mediocre work version that the other houses accuse him of, and that is, in fairness, sometimes accurate. What Snape's investment in Slytherin actually looks like from the inside is more structural and more useful than favoritism. He shows up for the boring things, the unglamorous things, the things that a head of house, who was simply going through the motions, would delegate or ignore. The Slytherin student whose family situation is complicated gets a conversation, not a pamphlet. The one whose grades are sliding gets an intervention before it becomes a crisis. The one whose housemates are making their life difficult gets a quiet word delivered in a register that Slytherin students understand, not a speech about values, but a precise and specific statement of what will happen if the behavior continues, delivered in a tone that makes the precision feel like the least of it. He runs the house the way he teaches potions, with exactitude, with an extremely low tolerance for sloppiness, and with a level of genuine investment in outcomes that he would never describe in those terms, and that his students feel anyway. You are better protected than you know. This is the foundational experience of being in Slytherin under Snape's watch during these years, living inside a level of institutional care that you cannot fully see because it operates largely in rooms you're not in conversations with professors and administrators, and visiting ministry officials that you will never hear about. In the consistent work of someone who has decided that this house's students will not be left to the mercy of a school that, for historical and political reasons, does not always extend that mercy readily. The Death Eater question circulates through these years like weather, present, ambient, impossible to fully address. You know which families have the history. You know which older students have parents whose past is what it is. Snape knows too, and his navigation of this, the way he maintains the house's functioning without either endorsing the ideology that some families carry or exposing his students to consequences they haven't personally earned, is a high-wire act that you observe without fully comprehending. He gives Slytherin plausible deniability by insisting on performance, on results, on the specific Slytherin value of competence as the primary currency. Not blood, competence. The argument is never made explicitly. It is simply lived in the dungeon every day until it becomes the house's working assumption. What you don't know in these early years is what he is doing at night, what meetings he attends, what information he carries in both directions, what the mark on his arm cost him in a period when Voldemort is gone, but not gone, when the Death Eaters are disbanding, but not disbanded, when the question of what the next phase of history will look like is open in a way that the answer has not yet closed. You trust him completely. This trust is not misplaced, but it is not the full picture. And the part of the picture you're missing, the thing he's doing for Dumbledore, the thing he's been doing since before most of you were born, is the part that will eventually make everything in the second half of the story make sense. You just won't have it until the second half. Part 3, Ravenclaw. The early years, 1981 to 1995. You are the house he respects and cannot fully respect simultaneously. The intellectual dimension of the relationship is genuine. Snape recognizes Ravenclaw's approach to magic with a specific recognition of someone who shares it, who has always been more interested in the theory underlying the spell than the spell itself, who annotated his textbooks as a student not because he was told to, but because the printed version was insufficient and the margins were available. You are the students most likely to ask the question that interests him. You are the students most likely to have read ahead of the lesson's requirement and arrived with a synthesis rather than a summary. In these moments, the moments of genuine intellectual exchange, which are rarer than they should be given the classroom's ambient tension, but real when they occur, something in Snape's teaching relaxes fractionally. Not warmth, engagement. The specific quality of a mind encountering another mind operating at a frequency it recognizes. This is not enough to make his classroom comfortable. It is enough to make it occasionally extraordinary. What Ravenclaw experiences under Snape in these years that the other houses don't is the specific discomfort of partial recognition. You are seen intellectually and managed interpersonally, which produces a relationship that is more frustrating in some ways than Gryffindor's clean antagonism or Hufflepuff's clean invisibility. You know he sees you. You know the seeing is incomplete. The gap between the intellectual recognition and the interpersonal distance is wide enough to fall into, and several Ravenclaws do, in various ways. The ones who keep trying to earn the full version of his regard and discover that the full version is not available, not to Ravenclaw, not to anyone really, though this will only be legible in retrospect. His potions theory is original. This is not something that can be said of most Hogwarts professors, whose mastery of their subject is deep within the existing framework and not extended beyond it. Snape has written into the margins of the magical tradition in a way that Ravenclaw recognizes, and that the house's students spend considerable time trying to access, through the library, through careful observation of his classroom demonstrations, through the rare moments when a question lands right and he answers more fully than he intended to. What you're building across these years is a partial map of a mind that is more interesting than its possessor is willing to let you see. You file the pieces. You don't have enough of them yet. Part 4, Hufflepuff. The early years, 1981 to 1995. He doesn't hate you. This is the best that can be said, and it is genuinely the best. Hufflepuff under Snape's watch in these early years experiences something that is, in its own way, more demoralizing than active hostility, the particular quality of not registering. You are in his classroom. You do the work. You achieve results that are, in the aggregate, reasonable, not the Ravenclaw-level theoretical sophistication that occasionally earns his fractional engagement, not the Gryffindor-level antagonism that at least produces a relationship of sorts, even if the relationship is adversarial. You are present, competent, and essentially invisible to the organizing categories of his attention. He grades your work accurately. This is something. He does not take points from you with the reflexive frequency he deploys against Gryffindor. He does not engage you in the intellectual exchanges he occasionally has with Ravenclaw. He does not extend the specific protective investment he gives Slytherin. He teaches you potions with a kind of professional neutrality that contains no personal dimension whatsoever. And the absence of the personal dimension is, in a classroom where the personal dimension is so present for everyone else, its own form of information. What Hufflepuff learns from Snape in these years is not primarily potions. It is something about how systems work, about how institutions distribute attention and care and antagonism, and how people fall through the categories that the distribution is organized around, and what it is like to be a category that the organizer of the distribution has not fully accounted for. This is useful knowledge. Not pleasant. Useful. The Hufflepuff students who take the most from these years are the ones who learn to be excellent without requiring his recognition of the excellence, who build competence in the dungeon from materials entirely internal to themselves, curiosity, persistence, the Hufflepuff quality of continuing without the external validation that the other houses receive in various forms, even the negative forms. You learn potions without his help. This is harder than learning with it, and the skill it builds, the capacity to develop expertise in an environment that is not designed to support it, will serve Hufflepuff students across their entire professional lives in a way that cannot be attributed to Snape's teaching. He didn't intend this. It happened anyway. That is, in its own way, the most Hufflepuff outcome possible. Part 5, Gryffindor. The later years, 1995 to 1998. Something shifts in fifth year, and the shift is visible even from the student end of the classroom. It is not that Snape becomes kinder to Gryffindor. He doesn't, and anyone expecting softening across the years has been reading a different professor. What shifts is the quality of his tension, a new layer added to the existing complexity, a frequency underneath the familiar antagonism that is different from the antagonism in a way that is difficult to name and impossible to ignore once you've noticed it. He is managing more than he was. The performance of being only what he appears to be requires more effort than it did in the earlier years, because what is happening in the world outside the dungeon has accelerated to a point where the effort of containment is showing at the edges. The occlumency lessons are the most visible expression of this. Harry in the headmaster's office, then in the dungeon, attempting to learn a skill that Snape is attempting to teach without giving him access to the information that would make the teaching make sense. You hear about these lessons secondhand, in the fragmentary, partially reliable way that information circulates through Gryffindor Tower, and what you hear confirms something you've been observing in the classroom. There is a specific quality to how Snape handles Harry in this period that exceeds the ordinary antagonism. It is more controlled, more deliberate, as though each interaction is being managed to a precision that the earlier years didn't require. Dumbledore's army is, from Snape's perspective, a Gryffindor operation. This is not entirely accurate. The DA draws from all four houses. But the leadership is Gryffindor, and the energy is Gryffindor, and if he knows about it, which he almost certainly does, his response is to not respond, which is itself a response of a particular kind. The man who has spent 20 years deducting points from Gryffindor for infractions considerably less significant than running an illegal dueling club inside the school takes no action against a group that is, on its face, exactly the kind of thing he would be expected to suppress. You don't know why at the time. The answer involves Dumbledore's instructions about what to let happen and what to stop. The answer involves Snape's own assessment of what the DA is and what it will become. The answer involves a level of strategic vision that operates on a timescale none of you are thinking on yet. One where an illegal student dueling club that gets caught and temporarily disbanded is a small cost against the value of students who, when the real fight comes, know how to fight. He is preparing you for something. You will not understand this until you're standing in it. Part 6, Slytherin. The later years, 1995 to 1998. The protection changes shape, and you feel the change without understanding it. Something in how Snape manages the house in these later years has a different quality from the earlier version. More deliberate, more careful, as though each decision about what to shield you from and what to let through is being made against a calculation you can't see. The Death Eater families are becoming relevant again in a way that they weren't during your earlier years, and Snape's navigation of this. The way he maintains the house's functioning, while the political temperature of the wizarding world rises towards something that everyone can feel and nobody is officially naming, becomes visibly more complex. He protects the ones who can be protected. This is the honest accounting. Not all of your housemates are protectable. Some of them are already committed, through family, through ideology, through the specific path that certain Slytherin students have been on since before Hogwarts. For these students, Snape's protection has limits that he cannot exceed without compromising the position that makes all the other protection possible. You observe this. You don't have words for it yet. It looks like favoritism or like abandonment depending on which student you are, and neither reading is wrong and neither is complete. Draco Malfoy in 6th year is the most visible expression of what this period cost Snape Slytherin. A student given a task he cannot complete and cannot refuse, watched by a head of house who has made an unbreakable vow to complete it for him, navigating an impossible situation while everyone around him tries to manage the impossibility without letting Draco see the full shape of what he's inside. You watch this from the periphery, and you see a boy who is not equipped for what he's been given, and a professor who knows this, and is doing what he can within constraints that are not visible from where you're standing. The truth of what Snape is doing for Slytherin in these years, the full truth, is something you will only understand in retrospect. He is keeping as many of you as possible out of something you cannot come back from. Not all of you. He cannot save all of you. But more than you know. Part 7, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. The Headmaster Year, 1997 to 1998. He sits in Dumbledore's chair, and the castle feels different. This is the first thing, not the political reality of it, not the ministry backing, not the Carrows installed as professors, and the new disciplinary regime, and the systematic dismantling of the version of Hogwarts that existed before. The first thing is the feeling. The specific quality of a building that knows the person in the headmaster's office and organizes itself accordingly, and the dissonance of that person being Snape, who has been part of this castle's fabric for 20 years in one role, and is now in another, and the castle's response to the change is legible in the atmosphere, if you know how to read it. Ravenclaw in this year experiences something unprecedented in its relationship with Snape, a version of him that is managing an entire institution rather than a single classroom, and the management is visible in ways that the dungeon never was. He is making decisions at the school level that operate on a logic you are, House of Questioners, compelled to analyze. The Carrows are allowed to operate. This is the visible fact, the damning one, the one that every student uses to construct the narrative of Snape as collaborator. The Carrows operate and Snape does not stop them, and students are hurt, and the hurt is real, and the accounting for it will be real. What Ravenclaw observes, with the specific observational quality of a house that watches carefully, is the pattern of what Snape does and does not allow. The Carrows are not stopped, but certain things are quietly, consistently, without announcement or explanation, redirected. Punishments that would have been severe are made less severe through mechanisms that require you to know the bureaucratic structure of the school to see. Students who are in the most danger are, in ways that are difficult to trace to a single decision, slightly less in the most danger than they would otherwise be. You build a partial map of this. You don't trust it. The evidence for collaboration is more visible than the evidence for what is underneath the collaboration. And Ravenclaw's commitment to epistemic honesty means you cannot let the partial map override the visible evidence. Hufflepuff in this year does not build a map. Hufflepuff in this year does what Hufflepuff does. It protects its own. It maintains its community. It shows up for the people it is loyal to regardless of the institutional structure surrounding the loyalty. The Carrows treat Hufflepuff with the same contempt they treat everyone who isn't useful to them. And Hufflepuff's response is the specific Hufflepuff response. Quiet, persistent, completely unimpressed by authority that isn't backed by anything worth respecting. Snape watches both houses this year from the headmaster's office. What he sees in Hufflepuff is Helga's philosophy surviving his year intact. What he sees in Ravenclaw is the closest thing to accurate understanding he has been extended in 20 years of teaching. Neither house will know this. He will not tell them. Telling them is not compatible with the thing he is still doing. Part 8, All Four Houses, The Shrieking Shack and After. He dies in the Shrieking Shack on a May evening, and the school doesn't know yet. The Battle of Hogwarts is happening. In the corridors, on the grounds, in the Great Hall, and somewhere on the edges of it, in a building connected to the Whomping Willow by a tunnel that most students know about and most have never used, the man who has been watching all four houses for 20 years is bleeding out on the floor and giving Harry Potter the last thing he has left to give. The memories. The full picture. The version of the story that makes every piece of the previous 20 years make sense in a way that none of the partial views, Gryffindor's enemy, Slytherin's protector, Ravenclaw's intellectual, Hufflepuff's indifferent professor, could assemble alone. Lily Potter's eyes. The unbreakable vow. The plan that Dumbledore designed and Snape executed across years of daily performance, daily cost, daily maintenance of a deception that required him to be exactly what he appeared to be, so that he could be exactly what he actually was. The two things occupying the same body, the same voice, the same dungeon classroom, the same head of house office, the same headmaster's chair. What the four houses do with this information, when it filters out of the pensieve and into the school's collective understanding of the man who watched them for 2 decades, is different for each house, and the difference is revealing. Gryffindor grieves and then forgives, because Gryffindor's relationship with the past is forward-facing and forgiveness is the courageous move. The house that spent 20 years as his primary target becomes, in the years after the war, his most vocal defenders, which is an irony that Snape would have found either satisfying or unbearable, and possibly both. Slytherin recalibrates. The discovery that their protector was also, all along, a double agent working against the ideology that some of their families carried produces a recalibration that is not simple and is not fast. Some Slytherin students find in this revelation a permission they didn't know they needed, the most senior Slytherin figure of their generation having been, underneath everything, on the right side. Others find it a betrayal of a different kind. The house works through this over years, in the specific Slytherin way, privately, strategically, without a great deal of visible processing. Ravenclaw assembles the complete map, takes all the partial observations from 7 years, the anomalies and the patterns and the moments that didn't fit the visible narrative, and places them against the full picture now available. The map coheres. The dissonance resolves. The house of questioners arrives, finally, at an answer, not with satisfaction, because the answer contains too much loss for satisfaction, but with the specific Ravenclaw experience of understanding something fully. It is not comfort. It is clarity. Hufflepuff mourns Cedric, mourns everyone, and then does what Hufflepuff does, which is continue. loyal to the people it lost, loyal to the ones who survived, loyal to the work of rebuilding without requiring anyone to explain why rebuilding is worth it. Snape is neither condemned nor celebrated in Hufflepuff's collective processing with particular intensity. He is understood slowly, as someone who was doing what he believed was necessary for people he had decided to protect. This is a framework Hufflepuff understands from the inside. The values differ. The structure is familiar. Harry names his son after him. This fact travels through all 4 houses and lands differently in each one. And the landing is its own kind of summary, not of Snape, but of what 20 years under his watch produced in the people who lived through it. A generation of witches and wizards who were, in every house, shaped by someone they thought they understood, who understood, in the end, a great deal more than they knew, and who carry, in the specific texture of their magical education, in the potions knowledge, and the house protections, and the partial maps, and the practiced competence built without validation, the evidence of a life spent watching them more carefully than any of them ever watched back. Until the end, when he finally let one of them see.